A rope sways in the wind, not just to end a man's life, but to turn his silence into a monument. In the Middle Ages, justice was theatre, where the body was the script and the crowd was the audience. What would terrify you more, the instant the rope snaps tight, or the years your empty stare still commands the road? Welcome to Veil of the Middle Ages, where we uncover the truths hidden behind the laughter, blood and shadows of medieval life. Long before the gallows became a stage of terror, the rope itself carried the authority of kings and lords. In Anglo-Saxon England, hanging was already a familiar punishment, but its fate shifted with each ruler's decree. William the Conqueror, seeking to tighten his grip on a newly conquered realm, restricted the use of hanging, preferring to blind or mutilate criminals instead. It was Henry I, his son, who brought the rope back with a vengeance, re-establishing hanging as the common penalty for theft and treason. From then on, the gallows stood as the most visible emblem of medieval justice, yet the right to hang a man was not reserved solely for kings. It was a fragmented privilege, parcelled out like land itself. Lords, towns, and even monasteries could hold the right of the gallows, a legal power that granted them not just authority, but also profit. Whoever owned the rope owned the outcome. When a man was executed, his goods, his plough, his tools, even the modest contents of his cottage were forfeit. The gallows did not only strip a man of life, it stripped his family of livelihood, transferring both body and property into the hands of power. This led to fierce rivalries. Monasteries quarrelled with local lords over jurisdiction, each eager to claim the condemned. There are records of abbots demanding their due corpse, insisting that a felon who fell under their legal boundary be hanged on their gallows, not another's. These disputes were not about mercy or morality, they were about revenue. To command the gallows was to command a steady trickle of fines, fees and forfeitures. Death in the Middle Ages had an economy, and it had geography. Gallows were never hidden away in secluded courtyards. They were built in open sight, often on high ground just outside town, visible from roads and fields. A newcomer approaching the city gates would be greeted not only by the spires of churches, but also by the stark silhouette of a wooden frame against the sky. These were not mistakes of planning. They were cartography with intent, signposts of fear designed to remind every traveller of the justice that awaited within. The medieval landscape is still littered with names that tell the tale: Gallows Hill, Gibbet Lane, Hanging Wood. Each was once a landmark of dread, a place where rope and timber spoke louder than any law. Villagers passing by needed no sermon to understand the message. The road itself became a courtroom, the hill a silent preacher of authority. And on the day of execution, those spaces transformed. Imagine it, prisoners dragged in a cart along the dirt road, wheels jolting over stones as the crowd thickened with each step. Vendors shouted, hawking pies and ale to onlookers eager for a spectacle. Children darted through the legs of the mob, some perched on donkeys to get a better view. Mothers clutched their infants tighter, while young men elbowed their way forward to jeer. The smell of sweat, livestock and smoke from hastily lit torches mingled in the air. What for the condemned was terror, for the crowd became a grotesque festival. It was, in truth, an inverted holiday, where feast days celebrated saints, execution days celebrated the state. Attendance was not only entertainment, but participation. Each gasp, each cheer, each murmur of prayer bound the people into the machinery of justice. The condemned might swing alone, but the weight of the rope was shared by all. In this way, the gallows became more than wood and cord. They were a theatre of power, a financial tool, and a landmark carved into the very map of medieval life. The rope belonged not just to the hangman's hands, but to the entire system that fed upon it. The lords who claimed rights, the monasteries who contested them, the towns that built their identity around them, and the crowds who gathered to make death a public ritual. The mechanics of hanging in the Middle Ages were crude, and that crudeness was part of its horror. Today, when we think of execution by rope, we often imagine the long drop, a carefully measured fall designed to break the neck instantly. That method, coldly mathematical, was only invented in the 19th century. In the medieval world, there was no such precision. What awaited the condemned was the short drop, a brutal dance of strangulation. The short drop meant death did not come with a snap of vertebrae. Instead, the rope tightened around the throat and the body fought violently for breath. Blood vessels swelled, the face turned dark, eyes bulged, and the tongue thrust forward in grotesque protest. The airway collapsed, the vagus nerve spasmed, the chest heaved in frantic rhythm. This was the macabre dance, danseur choreography written by nature and performed before a jeering crowd. The apparatus was pitifully simple. Sometimes it was nothing more than a stout branch with a rope dangling from it. In towns with permanent gallows, a wooden beam stretched across two posts stark against the sky. To begin, the condemned might stand on a ladder or balance on a stool. In other cases, the rope was looped through a saddle. The prisoner mounted a horse, and at the hangman's signal, the animal was urged forward, leaving the victim suspended. A shove, a kick, or even the gentle step of a horse was enough to transform a man into a warning. If medieval hangings seem primitive, that was by design. Death was not meant to be merciful. The slow choking, the desperate struggle, the violent spasms, all of it was part of the message. Where modern executioners measured rope length with a ruler, their medieval counterparts relied on spectacle. The suffering was the sentence. And yet, even within this cruelty, there was craft. The hangman's skill lay in the knot. A poorly tied noose could slip, letting the victim fall to the ground, forcing the scene to repeat. Too tight, and the condemned might lose consciousness too quickly, robbing the crowd of its expected performance. The best hangman knew how to balance tension, tight enough to hold, loose enough to prolong. Their reputation depended on it, as did their income. Families of the condemned sometimes slipped them coins before the execution, begging for a swift end. This practice, tipping the hangman was a desperate bribe for mercy, though mercy was rarely guaranteed. For the executioner, the role was paradoxical. He was despised as a tainted man, avoided in daily life, yet necessary to the very order of society. He carried out the will of kings and lords, but bore the stain of blood upon his own name. The hangman lived at the edge of town, his presence tolerated but never welcomed. On the scaffold, however, he commanded total attention. His knot, his gesture, his timing decided the border between agony and release. The condemned, too, played a role. They were expected to speak. A confession, a warning, a prayer. Some begged forgiveness, others cursed their judges. A few sang psalms as the rope tightened. Their words became part of the script, carried by rumour long after their bodies fell silent. To die on the gallows was to enter a theatre where every gasp and every word mattered. But the hangman was not the only actor. The crowd, vast and varied, became the chorus. On execution day, the square filled early. Vendors set up stalls, selling hot pies, roasted chestnuts, mugs of ale. Children darted through the throng, clutching sweetmeats bought with stolen pennies. Women prayed aloud, muttering pleas for the soul ascending before their eyes. Men shouted insults, mocking the condemned. Some came for judgment, others for entertainment. All came because absence was unthinkable. To witness was both duty and diversion. The law was never just announced, it was shown, felt, consumed, like a carnival. Weather added its own mood to the performance. On a hot summer day, the stench of sweat and livestock mingled with the sharp tang of rope tar. The air shimmered with heat, and flies gathered greedily around the scaffold. A man choking in the noose under the blazing sun seemed to wilt like meat left too long over fire. In the rain, the spectacle shifted. Hoods dripped, boots squelched in mud. The condemned shivered in wet clothes as drops traced his face. The rope itself grew slick, creaking as it strained. Thunder might rumble overhead as if the heavens themselves joined in the verdict. Whether under burning light or stormy skies, the gallows turned weather into stagecraft. In the end, the body always lost. The frantic dance slowed, limbs grew heavy, breath ceased, silence thickened. The crowd leaned forward, some with awe, others with satisfaction. Children whispered questions. Mothers hushed them. Vendors counted their coins. Life moved on. But the image of the rope swaying in the breeze lingered in every memory. The medieval gallows did not kill with precision. It killed with spectacle. The short drop made sure of it. The noose was not an instrument of silence. It was a voice shouting across the square that law and power were absolute, and that the body once condemned was nothing more than a puppet in their grip. If hanging was the curtain fall, then gibbeting was the encore, an encore no one could leave. To hang a man was to end his life. To gibbet him was to ensure that his death kept speaking for months, sometimes even years, long after breath had left his body. The practice was simple in concept, but devastating in effect. Once the execution was finished, the corpse might be lowered only to be raised again, this time locked in a cage of iron or bound in chains. The body was suspended in the open, swaying in the wind for all to see. In some instances, men were even placed alive in these iron cages, left to die slowly of thirst, hunger, and exposure. More often, the body was already lifeless, transformed from a man into a warning. To preserve the spectacle, the flesh was smeared with tar, a black, glistening sheen that slowed the rot. But preservation was never perfect. Flies found their way through every seam. Birds tore at the softened skin. Over weeks, the body withered into something unrecognizable, dangling bones clattering against the frame of iron. The gibbet was not just a display, it was a slow-motion sermon on the certainty of punishment, and it was never placed in secret corners. Like the gallows, gibbets were positioned where they could not be ignored, on hilltops visible for miles, at the bend of major roads, at the mouths of harbours. The message was clear. Here is what happens to traitors, to pirates, to thieves who dared disturb the order. Each cage became a landmark, each swinging skeleton a milestone of fear. Travellers marked their routes by them. Turn left at the hanging man, a farmer might say. The body was not only a deterrent, it was part of the map itself. Sometimes the message was multiplied. After the dreadful punishment of drawing and quartering, dismembered parts of the body were dispatched to different towns. A hand might rot above the gate of one city, a head spike the wall of another, the legs and torso displayed further still. The kingdom became a network of warnings, a grim constellation of flesh and iron. Each fragment told the same story: resist, and you will not just die, you will be scattered, your memory shredded into pieces across the land. But the true power of gibbeting was not only what it showed, it was what it forced people to sense. Imagine the smell on a hot afternoon, the stench of decomposition mixing with tar, wafting down into nearby cottages. Picture the sound of crows gathering, their wings beating as they tore at strips of skin, their calls echoing above the road. Hear the low hum of flies, a constant reminder that the body was no longer silent. Even the wind participated, whistling through hollow ribs, creaking the chains so that every passerby heard the voice of authority in metallic groans. A town could not ignore the gibbet, because the gibbet intruded on every sense. Placed by the sea, these cages became maritime warnings. Sailors approaching the harbour would see the skeleton, swaying in its iron frame, a black silhouette against the gulls and sky. Pirates were often left to rot there, their bones bleaching in salt air, their cages clanking as if to ward off others tempted by the same path. Inland, at crossroads or bridges, the same purpose held. The gibbet was a milestone of obedience. Step past and remember who rules this land. One might think of it as the medieval hashtag, a crude but unmistakable symbol repeated across the landscape, impossible to scroll past. Each gibbet was a tag pinned in iron, broadcasting a single theme: fear. Today, hashtags trend across screens. In the Middle Ages, they trended across skies, hanging from gallows and iron cages. Both served the same function: to capture attention, to imprint a message on the public mind, to make sure no one could pretend they had not seen. The sight was unforgettable. A skeleton in chains rocking gently against the horizon, its cage rusting, its bones rattling in the breeze, cast a shadow far beyond its physical frame. Children were warned not to linger. Merchants crossed themselves as they passed. Lovers lowered their voices. Farmers returning from market quickened their pace, unwilling to walk under the hollow stare of a man who once breathed as they did. For the authorities, this was the point. Hanging killed the man. Gibbeting killed the memory of resistance. It was not just a punishment of flesh, but an occupation of imagination. Every creak of iron, every flutter of wings, every rank odour was a reminder that power had the last word. The man might have once defied the law, but in death his body became the law's loudest proclamation. The gibbet was therefore more than a cage. It was a monument, not of stone, but of flesh and rust. A monument that declared the crown endures, rebellion rots, and the rope never forgets. One clipped coins, clipped lives, the reign of Edward IV. In the year 1279, England trembled under the shadow of scandal. Coins, the lifeblood of the realm's economy, were being clipped. Tiny shavings of silver were sliced from their edges, weakening their value and threatening the kingdom's fragile system of trust. For King Edward I, this was not merely fraud, it was treason against the crown itself. The culprits, the record said, were largely Jewish moneylenders, accused of conspiring to debase the currency. The punishment was swift and merciless. 280 Jewish men were dragged to the gallows in London, hanged in a mass execution that shocked even contemporaries. The sight of so many bodies swaying at once turned the city into a stage of terror. For the king, the spectacle proved his resolve to defend both coin and crown. For the victims' families, it was a wound that cut far deeper than the clipped silver. Today, historians are careful with the sources. Anti-Jewish prejudice ran rampant in medieval Europe, and charges of coin clipping often masked deeper currents of resentment. It is likely that guilt was exaggerated, innocence ignored, and stereotypes weaponized. But for Edward's regime, truth was less important than theatre. The rope spoke louder than evidence. A salt merchant passing the scene might mutter, "2 days ago I sold my wares to one of these men. Now he swings above the gate. How quickly silver turns to silence." The execution was not only a financial statement, it was a rewriting of the social order, hammered into the air with every creak of rope. 2. Inverted justice. The so-called Jewish punishment. In the chronicles of Northern Europe, there appears a darker twist, hanging not by the neck but by the feet. Some called it the Jewish punishment, though the term reflects the bias of the chroniclers, not the truth of practice. The image is shocking. Bodies suspended upside down, blood rushing to the head, the face purpling as consciousness ebbs. Medieval society revelled in such inversions. To be hung by the feet was more than death, it was humiliation turned physical. The body, literally reversed, symbolised the inversion of natural order that crime represented. Power displayed itself by turning the human form into a grotesque emblem. For us reading such accounts centuries later, the cruelty is hard to fathom. But in the Middle Ages, symbolism mattered as much as suffering. A man dangling upside down was a living signpost, declaring that justice had the right to twist life itself. A blacksmith's thought, watching from the edge of the crowd, "Iron I bend every day, but here the law bends flesh." When the world is upside down, perhaps this is what justice looks like. It is worth noting, however, that the sources are fragmentary. Was this practice widespread or an exaggeration preserved by hostile pens? Historians debate. Myth and reality blur on the scaffold, as they so often do. The Pilgrimage of Grace, Robert Aske and Sir Robert Constable. In 1536, northern England erupted in rebellion. Farmers, priests and townsmen marched under the banner of the Five Wounds of Christ, demanding an end to Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries. It was called the Pilgrimage of Grace, a movement that briefly shook the kingdom. When the rebellion collapsed, its leaders paid dearly. Robert Aske, a lawyer turned spokesman for the cause, was arrested and condemned. In 1537, he was hanged in chains near Clifford's Tower in York, his body left to twist in the wind. Sir Robert Constable, another prominent leader, was gibbeted above the Beverley Gate in Hull, his remains watching over the town he had once defended. Their deaths were not moments, but months-long messages. Citizens passing through Hull could not avoid Constable's cage. Children growing up in York grew accustomed to the sight of Aske's tarred figure, black against the sky. Their rebellion had promised to protect tradition. Their punishment became a new tradition of its own, the enduring presence of corpses as warnings. A mother guiding her child through the market square might whisper, "Keep your eyes down." That man above the gate once spoke for thousands, but now he speaks for no one. Yet, in truth, Aske and Constable continued to speak, their silence louder than sermons, their bodies etched into the collective memory of the North. The gate that failed. The Exeter Night. Not all hangings were for treason or rebellion. Sometimes the rope punished negligence itself. In Exeter, a grim tale unfolded when the city's mayor and gatekeeper were accused of failing in their duties. Their negligence had allowed a prisoner's enemies to break into the city and kill him. For the Crown, this failure was intolerable. The verdict was chilling. The mayor and the gatekeeper were themselves taken to the gallows. The very men entrusted with keeping order were displayed as examples of disorder. Their bodies swung where they had once walked with pride, proof that the law punished not only crimes committed, but duties neglected. To the people of Exeter, the lesson was unmistakable. Power could not be excused. Responsibility could not be shrugged away. The gate was more than wood and iron, it was trust, and trust once broken demanded blood. A tanner returning from work might pause, staring upward. Yesterday I bowed to him in the street. Today the rope bows his neck. If those at the top are not safe, who among us is? Threads between the cases. Across these episodes, rope and iron revealed their double nature. They punished the guilty, but they also punished memory, identity, and even myth. Edward's gallows turned prejudice into policy. Inverted justice made the human form into propaganda. Aske and Constable's cages turned rebellion into relic. The Exeter gallows proved that negligence could be as fatal as treason. Yet the message always reached beyond the scaffold. Merchants muttered, mothers hushed, craftsmen reflected, all became unwilling participants in the dialogue of punishment. The rope was not content with killing, it demanded witnesses. Numbers too carried their own theatre. Chronicles claim tens of thousands executed under Henry VIII, though careful historians note the figures are likely inflated. Still, the rumour itself had weight. Whether myth or fact, the idea that gallows never rested made people behave as if it were true. Justice relied not only on rope and iron, but on imagination. And for the condemned, the final vision was always the same. The last sight of the world seen from above, through the frame of wood and the blur of a crowd. Eyes scanning faces one last time, friends, foes, strangers, all fused together into the judgment of history. Justice in the Middle Ages was never meant to be quiet. It was theatre, staged in open air, performed with the body of the condemned as the unwilling actor. The gallows and the gibbet were not only tools of punishment, they were instruments of memory. They were designed to be seen, heard, smelled, and remembered. By controlling space, sound, and sensation, rulers wrote law into the senses of the people. Consider the placement. Gallows at city gates, gibbets on hilltops, dismembered heads on bridges. Each location was chosen for visibility. To enter a town was to enter under the gaze of justice. To leave was to pass once more beneath the warning of iron and bone. Geography became choreography. The condemned danced in the wind, and every traveller became part of the audience. The sensory assault was deliberate. The crowd did not only watch, they smelled the tar, the rot, the smoke of torches. They heard the creak of rope, the caw of crows, the murmurs of neighbours speculating about who might be next. Punishment reached into the body of the spectator, forcing memory through the nose, the ears, the skin. It was impossible to forget, because forgetting meant walking through the stench and sound of it every day. This strategy can be seen as the state's greatest innovation, fear as policy. Law was not simply enforced in courts, it was lived out in streets and fields. The rope and iron turned justice into a continuous broadcast, looping endlessly above gates and roads. People did not need to read statutes, they had only to look up. And yet, the spectacle was never complete without the crowd. The audience did not merely witness, they participated. They jeered, prayed, bought food, brought their children. They traded stories of what they had seen, exaggerating gestures and gasps until memory became legend. In this sense, the rope killed the condemned, but the crowd kept the punishment alive. Justice was collective. It demanded eyes as much as it demanded necks. We might imagine this dynamic as a triangle: rope, iron, and crowd. So the rope was the sentence, the act of execution. The iron was the display, the prolonging of punishment beyond the moment of death. The crowd was the multiplier, turning an isolated death into a communal experience. Remove any side and the message weakens. A hanging without display was soon forgotten. A display without audience was meaningless. A crowd without punishment had nothing to bind it. Together, the three sides created an unbreakable structure of deterrence. The power of this triangle did not end in the Middle Ages. Though gallows have long vanished from city gates, the psychology endures. Today, the theatre of punishment is not wood and iron, but images and feeds. The public gaze has migrated from hilltops to screens. Spectacle still rules. A trending hashtag functions as a gibbet in digital form. Repetition, visibility, a public message impossible to avoid. A viral video of shame echoes the jeering crowd, magnified 1,000-fold. The mechanics have changed, but the principle remains. Punishment must be seen to be believed. Imagine a montage. A medieval market square where bodies dangle, then a cut to a modern protest streamed live, camera phones rising like torches. In both scenes, the crowd shapes the meaning. In both, silence is complicity, noise is participation. The technology differs, but the theatre of fear is constant. The rulers of the past understood that memory is fragile, but spectacle is strong. A statute can be forgotten, a sermon ignored, but no one forgets the sight of a cage swinging above the road. Likewise, no one forgets the viral image that sears across feeds, replayed until it is carved into collective thought. The psychology is the same. Attention is power, and power thrives on being watched. Why did it work? Because humans are creatures of story and symbol. A hanging was not just a death, it was a narrative of betrayal and justice acted out before thousands. A gibbet was not just a cage, it was a monument to authority. The people walked away with images, and those images disciplined them more effectively than soldiers ever could. The spectacle was the weapon, and fear was its echo. The lesson of rope and iron is not confined to their time. It is a reminder that authority is never content to punish in silence. Power demands an audience. Whether in a medieval square or on a digital screen, justice seeks the stage and fear fills the seats. In the end, every rope and every cage revealed the same paradox. They were meant to silence a life, to erase a voice forever. Yet in displaying the body, in forcing people to look and remember, the executioners built a monument instead. Each dangling form spoke longer and louder than the living man ever could. Power tried to close the book, but the scaffold kept reopening its pages. And so the question echoes across centuries. If justice must be seen to be believed, what does our age choose to show? What monuments do we create in the glow of our own public gaze? The Middle Ages trusted rope and iron. We trust screens and signals. The tools have changed, but the theatre of spectacle still shapes the way fear, power, and memory are written. As the image fades from rope swaying against the sky to the shadow of an iron cage trembling in the wind, we are left with that haunting truth. Death may end a life, but spectacle ensures it is never forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of history. This is Veil of the Middle Ages. Subscribe and return next week as we lift the veil again, unveiling another untold chapter where the past is darker, stranger, and far more alive than legend ever allowed.